everybody. Good afternoon. I can't see any of you, so thanks for coming out. It's great to see everybody in person, even though I can't, again, see anybody. We're excited to be here to talk about building a compliant cloud framework for the U.S. Department of Defense. I think there's been multiple landing zones, multiple ways to build multi-account environment in AWS. We've got a great approach. Hopefully you enjoy the presentation here. Over the past 3 years or so, we've been helping U.S. Department of Defense customers, federal agencies, highly regulated customers build landing zones in AWS GovCloud. A lot of the program offices, a lot of the different agencies have come to us and said, we want to build either a brokerage or we want to affect a mission program migration into AWS, but we're not really sure how to start. We're not sure, do we use various AWS services? Do we build our own infrastructure as code? What can you do to kind of help us along in our journey? So we're here happy to kind of share some of our experiences with you, and with this special emphasis on DoD security, risk, and compliance. So just by way of introduction here, and I guess I should go back real quick. So I'm Jim Collins. I'm a senior consultant with AWS Professional Services. Here with me is my friend and colleague, Randy Domingo. We've about 3.5 years at AWS at this point. We've worked with dozens of customers to build these landing zones and to get ATOs on AWS. Let's get rolling. So at Amazon, we believe that we should start with the customer and work backwards. DoD mission owners have generally told us that they've got one of 3 goals, as you can kind of see on the screen right now. I want to build a secure and compliant environment to host my applications in the AWS cloud. I want to deploy a solution that helps accelerate the process to obtain an IL4, Impact Level 4, Impact Level 5 ATO. Or I've got multiple applications in a multi-tenant environment, and I wouldn't want to build a kind of brokerage in AWS GovCloud. So really what we're trying to do here is to describe some of the techniques and the code that we've built that's designed to accelerate that process. We're going to review a couple considerations around how to securely host multiple tenants within your cloud environment, and some of the operations and maintenance tasks that you are likely familiar with from working on premises and hybrid environments as well. So what does the DoD cloud journey look like? So from our experience and from working with customers, DoD customers are very, very familiar with working with their on-premises environments. Whether it's racking and stacking physical hardware, installing the VMware or Hyper-V hypervisor, installing Windows or Linux guest operating systems, kind of doing the care and feeding of the physical data center itself. And my background is actually in that world and doing the infrastructure builds for Army, Air Force, Marine Corps, Navy. And a lot of the time we spend a lot of cycles making the environment perfect, making the physical environment look really good and meet the initial specs that we were given on the first day of the migration from physical hardware to virtual hardware. And then shortly, 30 to 60 days later, we're out of capacity, we're out of a number of licenses. We can't really do much in terms of self-service. We've got to deal with the hardware that we're given. We've got to go patch our infrastructure. We've got to go essentially care and feed for all of these virtual machines that we've created. So we recognize that DoD comes from a lot of this, the legacy on-premises world. What does this look like in the cloud? How do we actually take the knowledge and the skills that we've built from migrating these applications from physical hardware to virtualized hardware all the way to the cloud, and then making use of cloud-native technologies and managed services? So again, going from traditional IT and government-owned data centers to what does that transformation and modernization process look like? And ultimately, how do I take the environment that I've built on premises? I know how to get an ATO. I know what my security controls look like. I know how to configure a firewall. I know how to install Windows. What does that look like in AWS and in the cloud? And ultimately, how do I accelerate the ATO that I'm going to inevitably have to get or to achieve in order to run my mission programs in the cloud? So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the code that we've built, but also just the patterns and the techniques that we've seen work to accelerate the accreditation process. So we'll kind of move into kind of the most important part of this entire talk is let's understand what the DoD cloud security and compliance requirements look like. And ultimately, we don't want to bolt them on later. Let's build them into the code that we've constructed. Let's build them into the environment that we instantiate in the cloud. First, I want to, and I know a lot of you probably have been to these events or these summits before, or have seen YouTube videos or tech talks about the AWS shared responsibility model, the shared responsibility that we have with our customers, but then also the responsibilities that AWS takes on for mission owners. So ultimately, security and compliance is a shared responsibility from the customers to AWS. This shared model can help relieve the customer's operational burden as AWS operates and manages all the physical hardware in our data centers, all the way down to the physical security into those same facilities. The customer then assumes a responsibility and management of their applications and their content. Our customers are ultimately in control of all of their data and their configurations. So the choice of how to encrypt, where to encrypt, what operating system you'd like to use, what your network and firewall configuration might look like, that falls on the customer side of the shared responsibility model. This is also where we find that the bulk of the work kind of goes into building compliant environments in AWS for DoD. I think it's widely understood that AWS provides a lot of the foundational building blocks of compute, storage, database, and networking, but you have to do more work on top of that, and that represents the undifferentiated heavy lifting that we want to help our customers to take some of that work off their plate with our code repositories here. The other thing that we see pretty often is at DoD, when you go to map the various NIST 853 controls to the RMF process, customers want to know, how does the AWS infrastructure meet these various control families? What can you do to kind of accelerate answering some of these controls for us? And how do we, ultimately, how do we reduce the burden on the mission owners, the people that we're serving at the end of the day, so that they don't have to write control answers over and over and over again? And from personal experience, and maybe some of you as well, the copy and paste that goes into Excel spreadsheets, into EMAS, into Exacta, into whatever homegrown system might exist. But ultimately, how do we make this easier? How do we actually show repeatable patterns and verifiable compliance in control answers, such that an auditor can look and say, yes, this is actually compliant, this is actually secure, this follows AWS best practices, this follows AWS well architected. So again, we wanted to kind of demonstrate here where this falls on the shared responsibility model, but we also recognize there's things that we can do to make this easier on mission owners. I kind of want to share this as well. So AWS gets customers at least 60% along in their compliance journey in terms of security controls. We're trying to kind of move the needle a little bit even further to the right to make this even more complete, closer to 100%. But ultimately, a lot of the choices that mission owners make affect, how compliant they might be, or just the different permutations for the various security controls. But again, the whole point of building these environments and building these various landing zones is removing some of the burden on our mission owners, who really should just consume services, not really have to worry about, as I mentioned before, the care and feeding of physical infrastructure, the VMware hypervisor, the Hyper-V hypervisor, and all on up. Everybody should be kind of worried about the actual mission applications that ride on top of this environment. So what do these compliance requirements really look like? So these landing zones need to be deployable on AWS infrastructure, hosted on US soil, maintained and operated by US citizens. Obviously, we need geographic separation for high availability. We need scaling, it's kind of the whole point of the cloud, and fault tolerance. For especially impact level 4 and 5 workloads, we need to adhere to ITAR and export control requirements, FedRAMP requirements, DFARS, and as I mentioned, the DoD CCSRG for impact levels 2, 4, and 5. Another common ask that we get is we must use FIPS 140-2 compliant cryptography. Again, how do we ensure that this is being used universally across our environment? How do we verify to an auditor or an accreditor that we are using these algorithms or this cryptography? How do we verify that things aren't deviating and mission owners aren't changing settings on us? We're going to dive a little bit deeper into all of these areas here, but When we go out to actually go get an accreditation for either a landing zone or a mission system, these are the 12 or 13 kind of topics or areas that we cover with our customers. So personnel, incident response, boundary protection, identity and access control, disaster recovery, all the way down to the physical hardware in the data center. We have to answer those controls. We have to provide assurances that we meet all these different requirements one way or another. And what we're trying to strive to meet these non-physical controls in code. So when we're talking about the solution that we're about to present here, the idea is that there's an additional benefit given to the workloads and the app servers that are implementing those controls. We can share those control answers with your tenants and with the various mission owners that are deploying solutions on top of this landing zone. So again, the idea is that mission owners and anybody that needs to go for an ATO doesn't have to keep answering, well, how do you protect the physical data center? How do we do identity and access control? It shouldn't be a choose your own adventure. It should be, let's follow the guidance and the standards that we built in our landing zone. I'm going to get into more detail here on how we meet these various things with the compliant framework here shortly. First things first, how do you build that secure foundation? You've heard me talk about the idea of a landing zone. I don't think the idea of a landing zone is probably foreign to many people at this point, but the idea is you need one. That's the step one here. It is that secure, scalable, multi-account AWS environment that follows AWS well architected. It really just allows you to experiment, to iterate, to migrate workloads in that secure foundational environment without having to worry about scalability, security concerns, the compliance of that cloud footprint. So this, again, this is your foundation. We are going to help build on that idea. What are the elements of a landing zone? Again, make it secure and compliant. It's got to meet your organization's security requirements, your auditor's requirements. It has to be scalable. The whole point is not to just move in place what a DoD or government-owned data center is into the cloud. It's actually to take advantage of the elasticity that the cloud provides, that AWS provides, and to actually make those workloads scalable to extend and contract to whatever the workloads requirements might be. And that kind of goes hand in hand with the adaptability and flexibility of the landing zone. We want to make sure that the brokerages or the tenants can actually configure how large their environment might grow to, or if you want to save cost or you want to reduce the spend, how do you contract that back to resources that you need just for that workload instead of the sprawl that physical infrastructure might take up. So kind of the meat of the presentation here. So what is the compliant framework and how can it benefit you? So the idea is that the compliant framework is that landing zone that you can deploy in AWS GovCloud. That is that secure, compliant, multi-account foundation that exists in GovCloud. As you're all likely aware, so Control Tower is not available yet in GovCloud. This is that answer to building that multi-account environment in the GovCloud fabric. This code base is designed to accommodate both the DoD CCSRG requirements, but also CMMC. So for our defense industrial-based customers and partners, they can actually take this exact same code base, make configuration and parameter changes to accommodate CMMC as well. A lot of these compliance frameworks, as you all might be aware, they all kind of derive from NIST 853. So it kind of makes it easier when you define those parameters in code, store them in a code repository, and then audit how they're configured. That's what this code base is designed to do. So the compliant framework also includes an implementation guide, architecture diagrams, cloud formation templates. Randy's going to correct me and say it's CDK, and security controls that you can then take to your auditors and your security teams to kind of validate that we are meeting those various compliance requirements. The architecture diagrams are also important, having built a bunch of EMAS packages and building that body of evidence for customers. A lot of this is editable, and you can kind of customize your environment to your liking, but the foundational code remains consistent. And again, you can customize that deployment model to suit your particular compliance requirement. So how can you actually get the compliant framework? I'm going to pause real quick so you can take a picture of that QR code, but there's also a URL that's really long on the screen here. So at its core, the compliant framework is that open source multi-account solution for our highly regulated customers. We really kept the DoD CCSRG in mind as we were architecting this. But again, because a lot of the compliance frameworks are similar and all derivative from NIST controls, you can take this and kind of morph this to FedRAMP. You can morph this to the DoD. You can morph this to various other federal agencies, as well as the DIB for CMMC. But again, it's that infrastructure as code package that hydrates your initial cloud landing zone in GovCloud. You can download this at that URL in the AWS Solutions page. It's also on GitHub as an open source solution. Like I mentioned, if you didn't get a chance to take a picture of this, we'll go back in a little bit here. But like I mentioned, this also, this is all derivative from DISA's guidance, from the CCSRG, from the cybersecurity maturity model guidance that's been put out, but also AWS best practices as well. And buttons that do not work. There we go. So just take a moment to talk about AWS GovCloud. So the whole idea is that you can also take this code base and deploy it in AWS commercial regions, but our customers who are hosting impact level 4 and 5 data especially are looking for the GovCloud region that can support those workloads that require being on US soil and managed by US citizens. So GovCloud, just to kind of review here, it is that isolated, secure, and compliant environment that's purpose-built for sensitive and regulated workloads up to and including controlled unclassified information. Again, designed for mission-critical workloads, and it includes native services and tooling to help you meet your compliance objectives. GovCloud West in August 2011, GovCloud East in November of 2018. Logo slide here. So we're really focusing on the compliance regimes that are in GovCloud for this solution. And I've touched upon the FedRAMP moderate and high, but also the DoD CCSRG for impact level 4 and 5, and then the NIST 853 control families. But figured we show this as well. There's other compliance frameworks that are available in AWS US CONUS regions. But again, I think the focus here with the compliant framework is to deploy into GovCloud. Just a quick review. What does the DoD cloud journey look like at this point? The idea is that a compliant framework kind of fits that niche. Well, what do? I've got this on-premise environment. I'm looking to migrate some of my workloads to the cloud. How do I even get started? So by deploying the compliant framework, you can start answering those questions around security, compliance, operations, and then your foundational infrastructure. We're going to go a little bit further into the actual solution and the code base to kind of show how you can take this code and the foundation to actually go for an ATO. But the idea is that as we're moving kind of left to right here, a lot of the code and the underlying cloud platform kind of answers the controls for you with the compliant framework. So we talk about the actual solution itself. What does it include? Essentially 4 core areas. So an account management, identity and access management, security and governance, and then you can actually extend that solution. So for account management, again, we're building a multi-account environment. The idea is that mission owners can come to the brokerage or this code base and say, hey, I want a series of AWS accounts that are configured securely against my organization's baseline or against the FedRAMP baseline or impact level 4 and 5, and I want to manage this all centrally. So the idea is we're centralizing transit, we're centralizing our shared services, so think Active Directory or ACAS, HBSS, Identity Federation. There's more slides on this later. But essentially, we don't want to make our mission owners go instantiate all of these services every time that they need to go deploy a new workload. Take advantage of the centralization, take advantage of the consolidated guardrails, and the speed at which you can deploy these environments. Again, instead of having to kind of configure these all bespoke, the code base handles this for one or many AWS accounts. And then we talk about identity and access management. Use a single federated identity source or a single enterprise directory to kind of allow your mission owners access to their own environment with those provable controls that they only have access to the resources that they're entitled to. So for, again, security and governance, you get that logical separation of workloads. We include the initial guardrails, the initial baseline with AWS config. You get your initial network baseline as well. A lot of customers overlay next generation firewalls, so think your Palo Altos or your F5s. and even the AWS network firewall that was recently released to GovCloud. Different ways that you can segment your networks, your logical networks in this environment, kind of dependent on where you're talking to. Are you talking back on-prem? Are you talking across the cap to another mission system? You're talking out to the internet with an open data feed. Again, all of this is customizable through the centralized code base here. And then finally, we know we don't have all the answers in terms of how the solution should look. A lot of our customers come to us and say, how do we deploy secure remote access? How do we deploy the DevOps pipelines and the agile tooling? How do we link all this with the compliant framework and make this relatively seamless in the same code base? So the idea is that the code is modular and extensible through add-ons, so you can easily flex to kind of decide what you want to put in this environment and expose that out to your mission owners or even just the brokerage itself. So we talked about those 12 or 13 areas of control families that are addressed by various groups of people. So if you look all the way to the left here, you are responsible ultimately on premises for everything. And that's the gold column there on the left. What we're trying to do is take some of that work away from mission owners, away from program offices, and say, well, AWS covers a lot of these things natively, the actual physical security of the data center, the virtualization platform, the core networking, and of course, compute and storage. But if you're rolling your own solution or coding your own landing zone, perfectly acceptable, and a lot of our customers do that either in Terraform or various other infrastructure as code options. Really what we're doing here is providing another option in CDK that's maintained and supported by the AWS Solutions team here.
Hey, Jim.
Yes, sir.
Sorry.
Yeah, sure.
So, a lot of DoD customers
Sorry.
need to use a CSSP.
Sure.
Sometimes they sort of get CSSP functionality themselves.
Sure.
Or they outsource it to somebody else.
Yep.
Which of these things apply or often apply to a CSSP?
Sure. So if you look at the question was around what do we do with the CSSP, where do they fit in the control and implementation? So I'm looking at kind of a purple color here. Hopefully it's purple up here. That kind of falls within various areas here. So depending on what services you contract your CSSP with, they may be doing log aggregation for you. They may be doing incident response for you. They may be doing the classic is HBSS and ACAS, right? They're doing endpoint protection. They're doing malware, antivirus scans. They may be doing vulnerability scans for you as well. So you kind of fall into that purple gold area. That's you, AWS, and the compliant framework. The you in this case also means your CSSP partner. So hope that's helpful. It's actually a good call out because a lot of the time when we integrate the compliant framework with, if you think about Army C5ISR, NIWC PAC, the various other CSSPs, DISA even, they do provide a lot of this for you, but they're expecting that the environment looks a certain way, or they're expecting that they need to be able to plug into either S3 to consume the logs on your behalf. They need to plug into either EC2 if they're running those agents on the compute infrastructure. The various other things, they may need the networking configured in a certain way to accommodate either Cisco CSRs or Palo Alto devices, however they do break and inspect. A lot of this makes this very easy to kind of plug into such that you're handing them essentially what they're expecting. And we've worked kind of closely with these various CSSPs. They themselves run a lot of the same infrastructure for their own environments because they themselves are a multi-tenant environment as they expose services out to their subscribers. And I guess I'd be remiss if I didn't say, so the compliant framework, the reason it's shared, you get to make those choices. We provide the foundational code, but because all this is parameters, is all either the parameter stored in parameter store and systems manager, or configuration choices that you can make in code pipeline, and this is where I will hand it to Randy shortly here, to actually customize it to your liking. But a lot of the things that we do here are not one-way door decisions. You can actually go back and say, man, I don't want to consume these CSSP services. I'd like to roll my own. For one reason or another, it's easier for me to manage, or I'd rather hand all this to the CSSP or the CSP. You can make those choices in configuration and then redeploy, and then the pipeline will execute accordingly. actually, I think this is where I hand it off to Randy.
Sounds good. Cool. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, so the compliant framework, I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into the technical implementation details, a lot of the decisions that we've made, making as prescriptive of an environment or prescriptive in our selections of what the environment should look like, based off of, again, like Jim was saying, AWS best practices, DISA secure cloud computing architecture, you know, a lot of inputs coming into it, the CCSRG, as well as the much broader, you know, we need to meet the NIST 800-53 requirements. So at the core of it, the compliant framework is a CDK application. So it is written using the Cloud Development Kit and is available to you as open source per that link a little bit earlier. And we'll provide that towards the end of the presentation. But it's a fully code-based implementation for the core foundational aspects of your environment or your landing zone within AWS. So when you execute it, this will automatically deploy multiple AWS accounts, which are depicted here. Here's the 4 main accounts that we deploy. And what that allows you to do is to be able to define very specific accounts that are function oriented, right? So the idea being here that each one of the AWS accounts in this architecture is independent, meaning that if there's an incident in one of the accounts, it's isolated from the others. And again, following our AWS best practices, our multi-account strategy, that is kind of what we're trying to adhere to there. So there's several things that this environment enables. First, because we are enabling organizations, you can take advantage of consolidated billing. You can take advantage of AWS organization's ability to deploy guardrails into your accounts via service control policies or SCPs. And you also have the ability to delegate those IAM permissions to the rest of the accounts. It also allows you to be able to share different resources with all the different accounts here. So whether that be EC2 snapshots or setting up an AMI pipeline, or what we utilize it directly for within the compliant framework is to share a networking stack or our transit gateway, which provides kind of the network fabric between your mission applications, your tenant accounts, and the shared services within our management services and our transit account. So I'm going to kind of walk through each one of these accounts. We'll have an opportunity to dive deeper into the management services. So we'll double click into management services in transit to see what that looks like. I'll also double click into an exemplar tenant account in just a bit. So that way you can see how that's all kind of interrelated. But starting with the central account here, so that represents the core of the compliant framework. It is where our infrastructure pipeline is being deployed. So we are using code pipeline along with other processes like code build and Lambda to be able to go deploy that infrastructure in the accounts. We're also instantiating a code commit repository there. So all of the code that we provide via GitHub is brought over through our installation stack into your own code commit repositories. That allows you to do multiple things there. One is you can be fully in control of your stack. If there were modifications and changes that you wanted to make, say, to a security group or a VPC definition, you own that piece of code there, while preserving the Git history that's there, so that way when we're pushing updates from our end, you can manually elect, or if you want to set up automation for it, you can elect to pull in those updates from our public repositories into your solution and be able to deploy them. Again, we are using a combination of infrastructure as code tools, primarily CloudFormation. So we do define some resources in native CloudFormation. And most importantly, we are using the Cloud Development Kit. So the Cloud Development Kit is a higher level language. We elected to use TypeScript for our implementation to be able to define different constructs and modules. So think constructs and modules are classes, objects of AWS functionality or code. So we are ingesting the inputs that you put into it. For example, the CIDR ranges that you want to use for the different VPCs, the type of compliance you want to use, meaning if I'm doing impact level 4, impact level 5, we'll help make some of those decisions as to dedicated VPC or default tenancy VPC. So we're trying our best to be able to go in, again, set a lot of those foundational aspects of your landing zone based off of the best practices that we know across all the different inputs of opinions and compliance requirements. As well, in the central account, you'll find we're utilizing central account in GovCloud as our centralized aggregator for a lot of our security information. So we're setting up aggregators for AWS config, which does a configuration change recording across all the different resources within AWS, as well as configuring managed config roles within that account, which are also going to go check the compliance state of those resources in those accounts. The other thing is we're enabling a security hub to be able to aggregate all that, and the compliant framework will actually, for the frameworks for the NIST controls that aren't part of the security hub proper, we are actually providing those as custom findings into this implementation of security hub. So you're going to get, in addition to the AWS best practices, the AWS security foundations frameworks inside security hub, we're also extending that with the NIST controls. Again, all of this code is going to be resident within your account, running across the different AWS accounts in your environment and then aggregated to that central account. Additionally, what you're going to see is a management services account that's akin to the VDMS, or the Virtual Data Center Management Services requirements of the SCCA. That's where we're going to have, a lot of those VDMS-defined services, like a enterprise directory service, a DNS solution, your centralized logging, and then federation or SSO solutions that are going to be there. Additionally, right next to it, we are also configuring a logging account. So that is going to be very close to our AWS multi-account strategy and AWS best practices. Again, leaning very closely to a lot of recommendations as well in Control Tower to have a separated logging account. It's a non-compute account, meaning we don't deploy VPCs. That's not where the log aggregation server is going to be, but it's going to be where we put an S3 bucket. And that S3 bucket is going to have file integrity turned on, meaning that we'll create CRC hashes next to each one of the logs that come in, as well as encryption. And you can also, once you're running in production, you can also configure this to be able to go trim down the amount of users that have access to that account. That helps support and helps you meet the requirements for being able to do forensic analysis on whether or not if and when you were to have an event, we at least know there is a data store that has a lot of the logs that are AWS related. So think CloudTrail, config, VPC flow logs. And if you want to go configure your application or kernel logs to also send over, OS logs to also send over into this account, we've helped customers to be able to go configure that within the compliant framework. Lastly, what you're going to see here is a transit account that's akin to the virtual data center security stack. I'll be diving deeper into that in the next slide, but that is where we would deploy a traditional next generation firewall and have that connection going back to, in this case for the DoD, through the CAP connection to be able to give you DoD access, or the DoD network access. So this is a double click into the transit account. We've depicted here the transit VPC with an exemplar next generation firewall. So again, choose your vendor, or AWS Network Firewall has just become available within GovCloud, so that also is a potential option for your environment here. But again, the intent here is to also meet the VDSS requirements, or Virtual Data Center Security Stack requirements, as defined by the DISA SCCA. So the transit account provides multiple options to be able to extend your on-premises network. You can terminate onto that next generation firewall using a Direct Connect virtual interface to be able to get there. And we're using Direct Connects to be able to provide that, that secure, private, low latency connection into AWS. And the way that we have it configured is that your tenant accounts will not need or require internet gateways, because we do want to force all that traffic through that centralized stack. The other aspects of it, again, here you can see the transit gateway. We're going to talk about that a little bit more when we get to the tenant account. But the purpose here is that transit gateway acts as that hub within the model here to be able to manage all the east-west traffic that's coming through your environment. So using transit gateway route tables, using the the next hop definitions that are in those route tables. We can take all of the traffic that's coming from each one of your tenant accounts and then define all of that to send over to your next-gen firewall to support your inspection requirements there. So if you, again, we've seen customers configure this and set up their next-gen firewalls to do the full packet inspection or full packet capture and logging. So it's kind of a combination of the two here to be able to integrate AWS native functionality like VPC and Transit Gateway to connect over to that next generation firewall. Next, kind of a deeper dive into that management services. Again, your traditional services that you're going to expect within a VDMS or virtual data center management services account, your vulnerability scanning, your host-based scanning, endpoint protection solutions would be there. So the host would be resident there, and you would obviously put the agents and whatever you need on your the rest of your EC2 services or as requirements within your tenant accounts. An enterprise directory service or DNS, federation, whether you're doing some kind of single sign-on solution is often found within the management services account. One of the things that I do call out that that we don't normally find within our management service are going to be things that kind of fall out of the VDMS requirements. Think of collaboration tools or shared file directories. We often treat those, or we advise to treat those as a separate tenant account. So we'll just stand those up, whether it be a collaboration stack or a DevOps stack that you're providing as a service to the rest of your enterprise. You would set that up as a separate tenant account and utilize our transit gateway, our transit networking to be able to provide that the network access to it. Good question. So I think I didn't get to that on the last slide. So kind of two aspects there. You can have your traditional external facing VPC, which we'll have there to be able to support management plane activities into the firewall, so that way you can do management at the edge. And we've also seen people want to elect to put jump hosts or bastion hosts into that enclave there as well. So again, internet facing enclave there, so that way you can go separate that out. Underpinning a lot of that is using the transit gateway, right, to be able to provide the networking between our VPCs and to be able to give you that isolated control of next hop access and defining that. Additionally, if you're electing to use like AWS managed AD, you can also deploy AWS workspaces. We've done that with the solution. We'll talk about the extensibility and the different plugins that we've developed on top of the framework, but our focus here is to make that initial part, right? Like, what should my account structure be? What should be the initial guardrails I put in place? What are the initial config rules that we should have for accounts? So that way we can start having those higher level discussions about, okay, I know I need to go meet a DoD impact level 4 requirement set, and I know that I'm mandated or I need to utilize these certain services and have them in certain places. So our intent here is to be as prescriptive and close to the SCCA as far as what the architecture looks like, so we can start, dragging and dropping or instantiating those services in the right enclaves within the environment.
And Randy, real quick, well, one thing I will add too, for especially components or mission owners that are using Linux, or so Red Hat or Amazon Linux, would be systems manager, session manager. Deploying that solution, what we found is that requires no internet gateway. You can use a private link to make that a private connection. I think a lot of DoD mission owners and customers don't necessarily look at session manager that often and prefer SSH or direct access through a bastion. We've actually found that a lot of the time when we're actually demonstrating session manager and the fact that you can access that through the console, through the same IAM, AWS IAM service or your identity federation, we actually get a lot of traceability. You can record the sessions. There's a lot of other compliance controls and inheritance that you can get by using Session Manager without having to stand up the infrastructure that would support remote access. So go ahead. Yeah, no, that's a great point. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, using Session Manager, so if you don't need GUI access and you can go straight to the console to be able to do your administration, Session Manager, very easy choice there to be able to utilize there. The one thing I do want to point out within our management services, we also deploy AWS Service Catalog. So Service Catalog allows you to be able to go manage a catalog of IT services. So think things that are, whether those are software packages, additional infrastructure, EC2 instances,
In our case, we are configuring the compliant framework with an initial service catalog portfolio that allows you to be able to go generate and vend new tenant accounts and tenant VPCs. When you generate a tenant VPC, that will automatically provide two aspects. So when we talk about a framework, we talk about two aspects here. One is the security guardrails, right? So when you set up that initial account, we are using AWS CloudFormation stack sets to be able to baseline the accounts from a security perspective. And then once you go deploy that VPC, we are automatically attaching that VPC to the transit gateway hub network that's been deployed. And once that next generation firewall is configured, it is automatically, sending all of that traffic through that firewall for inspection. So we're storing that within the management services account. Again, there's initial VPC in there, easily extendable to be able to also support an EC2 strategy or a data store strategy, think RDS or other shared network drive type of architectures there.
Real quick, so there was a question about CSSP. So this is where, if you are contracting with a CSSP, or if they're asking to install some of their infrastructure, so it could be a Nessus scanner or a security center, typically we carve out another VPC in this same account to actually handle your vulnerability scanning services or your endpoint protection services. So depending on how the CSSP manages their own infrastructure or delegates that to you, you may or may not have to actually remotely access that to run your own scanning or define your own policies in McAfee EPO or your Nessus scans in whatever cadence that might require. So I know it's not super well defined here in this diagram, but ultimately you are in control of vending out additional VPCs for your CSSP through that service catalog product that Randy was describing.
Cool. And lastly, what does the actual tenant account look like? Again, we put an exemplar one out there with our service catalog product. We try to lean on AWS best practice here, so multi-AZ approach, clear separation or segmentation of our different subnets based off of a three-tier architecture. In this case, you'll see a DMZ, app subnet, and then a data subnet. So DMZ, traditional load balancers, or your proxies would be sitting there, an application tier for your web servers, and then if you're using any databases or data stores, having those within that database. So a lot of literature in that aspect of what a well-designed tenant application or tenant three-tiered web architecture can look like within AWS, whether that's hosting EC2 instances or being completely serverless in hosting your Lambda functions and your API, using API gateway in front of Lambda to be able to host your web application through that mechanism. What's important with respect to the compliant framework or these DoD solutions where you want to be close to the SCCA architecture is kind of the picture here to the left with the transit gateway. So being able to establish this VPC, this account, again with the security guardrails there, but forcing a lot of that network traffic back to our inspection stack or our VDSS for that functionality. So when you utilize our service catalog, that's part of it. It will automatically set up that connection to the transit gateway, set up the routing for it. There will be a default route that sends all the traffic that way, and we'll also configure a configuration rule or deploy a configuration rule that will check to make sure that no internet gateways, so there's no mechanism for your tenant workloads to be able to egress outside through the internet, not through your firewall appliance. So again, the framework is about setting that initial baseline, right? So once we have the accounts, once we have our VPCs in place, how do we extend this? I did want to call out that our AWS professional services team, we have worked with multiple customers and clients to be able to go in and tailor the compliant framework or build on top of the compliant framework for their specific mission needs. So whether that's a data lake solution because they're providing that as a service to other enterprises, or a DevOps pipeline to be able to help mission owners do the development of their applications. We talked about bastions and all that. You can also provide workspaces as a solution to be able to support office productivity. So we look at it as, again, when we look at the shared responsibility model, there is the foundational thing that AWS as a whole goes in and provides, and then there's what you as a customer are responsible for doing. We're trying to make that, a lot of the help with the decision making there with providing the prescriptive guidance for that, again, that next layer up, which is the compliant framework to then allow you to be able to go do what I call are the sharp edge missions, right? The sharp edge mission applications or mission capabilities that will go on top of this hosting environment. Again, it's foundational and it's extensible, meaning that it is all provided as open source on GitHub. You can go look at it for, if you don't want to use the solution as a whole, we try to do our best to create design patterns in there. So if you're new to CDK and you want to go look at what a construct library might look like specifically for how it would be used within the DoD, there are examples of that within the source code. We've seen partners and other customers take our code base and then modify it or extend it to go add differentiators or whatever other functionality that they want to do. Excuse me, for Kubernetes? Yeah, so this is just a small sample of the available services or the add-ons that we've seen customers build or we've helped customers build within AWS. For container-based solutions, if they want to use EKS or Elastic Kubernetes service, or if they want to use our container service, that's all possible on top of the compliant framework. Again, the idea here is to set that initial networking layer and making sure that the security guardrails are there so that way you can do things like making sure encryption is enabled on the underlying EC2 services and all that. So any of those over-the-top services that you would want to use, if it's within policy for your organization to be able to utilize it, by all means, you can build that on top of the compliant framework. Stig?
That's a good one. No, I can't help but jump in it. So a lot of the projects that we do, that is the foundational requirement. We need to run a stigged EC2 of some sort. What we found is the customers will ask for, just give me an AMI that's stigged already, and I want to vend that out to the rest of my mission owners, and they can create their own solutions on top of it. Half or more of the time, they can't actually deploy anything on top of it, so it's like, well, not really usable, and they end up unwinding all the stigs. So what we found works, and is just another extension of the compliant framework here, is that AMI pipeline. So we get them about 60 to 70% of the way stigged. You can actually use an AMI out of the marketplace for Windows, just as an example. But a lot of the time, they want the pipeline because they want it continuously updated. So help me build that pipeline, help me build that reusable code so that I can continuously stig and continuously harden my AMIs, not just that point-in-time static AMI that I've configured just for today. That actually lives within that VDMS, the management services construct. But you can extend that out to all of your tenants and just say, in the service catalog, give me the AMI of the day or of the week or the month or whatever it might be, instead of the static AMI that, as everybody probably knows, is out of date almost immediately after it's created.
Okay, and for the containers, you have the similar pipeline?
Similar thing, yeah, same constructs. You can do, the Red Hat Universal Base Image as an example if you're kind of building your own pipeline. You can use the container or the EC2 instances that power ECS or EKS as well. It's just the code will kind of prompt you for an AMI ID, and you can either cycle that in through Systems Manager Parameter Store or just create your own. So off the pipeline, I got the AMI ID as the output, drop it right into the compliant framework, and you're kind of off to the races. Sure.
Yeah, and that was kind of a good segue for kind of what our next slide here is with respect to service catalog. So I apologize, the question was about what about Kubernetes, EKS, or AMIs and STIGs and all that. So again, I talked about service catalog. We're initially using that to be able to go deploy a tenant VPC, allow you to be able to deploy that to your tenants. You can also extend that to be able to go support a reference EKS stack that you want to make available to your tenants or mission owners and make that self-service for them to be able to go deploy that into their accounts. What's nice about Service Catalog is you get to deploy those with the guardrails and the security policies around that set of functionality. And because it's the ones that you've vetted, you go through your CM process to make those per your requirements. We talked about the network connectivity being restricted in the app owner's account through doing detection, making sure that they're adhering to that through config rules, and then making sure that the next hop or their default route is being sent to our transit gateway. We talked about application owners being able to go in and also securely access the AWS console once you have a federation service, once you've made that decision as to what your SSO portal is going to be, enabling that with MFA, so that way you can provide that secure connection or that console access there. So Yeah, and lastly, like we talked about with Session Manager, you know, in the case that you'd be fine with having terminal access to be able to go do management of your individual hosts or whatever management activities you have. I'd look at Session Manager. We've also integrated, like we said, workspaces and or pure Bastion hosts over the top. So again, the idea here is that the compliant framework is going to try to bring you a little bit closer towards being able to have that prescriptive model in place, or that prescriptive environment in place to be able to start landing the rest of your workloads and ultimately get closer to that ATO goal. So.
Do you have any templates for supporting security documentation like SSP that essentially shows some of the components?
Yeah, so the question here was whether or not AWS provides any SSP templates to be able to go support these controls. If you actually go into AWS artifacts, there's multiple types of documents there. So there are some templates related specifically towards AWS as far as documentation in that aspect. We also provide, as part of this solution, a customer responsibility matrix to be able to help you understand some of those decisions that we've made within our implementation and architecture against a separate compliance standards and controls. So again, that's available to you as a resource and through the AWS console, through AWS Artifact, as well as our architecture diagrams or architectural deep dives in our documentation that's open source and available through our AWS Solutions site. But yeah, good question. There you go.
There's been kind of a mixture of customers. Some will use Inspector in combination with something like the Nessus agent. I think various CSSPs do the kind of the passive scanning with the subnets and kind of getting the results. But even, you know, Inspector acts as kind of a good check on, like, if you're looking for kind of separation of duties. It checks what Nessus is doing. It checks kind of what McAfee EPO might be doing. It's used almost to augment the capabilities of those native services that the CSSP might provide. I haven't seen Inspector be a wholesale replacement for a lot of those services, namely because the CSSPs themselves have their own requirements. But again, if you're looking for a good check on what the CSSP is actually looking at and what they're doing, Inspector provides that good baseline, and the reporting is pretty robust. So have seen it. It is a potential option.
Yeah, we find that Tenable is ahead on what the agency needs, and Inspector is ahead on the guidance for the CSP.
That's good that they work kind of hand in hand inadvertently there, so that's good. Thank you.
And I'll hand the controls here back to
Yeah, I guess I'm going
Jim.
the last couple slides here. I'm going the other direction. You guys want to talk about that again? So a lot of the questions that we've kind of had have kind of revolved around, okay, this is all great, awesome code and great repository, but how do I actually operate the thing? And what are the choices that I can make to extend a lot of these things that you're kind of seeing on the screen here are inside that VDMS, that management services stack. A lot of our customers will say, well, I've got third-party tooling, I've got requirements from various agencies or auditors or people who've made kind of tooling choices for me. What are the equivalents or rough equivalents that AWS provides as a native option or a native service? So we wanted to kind of, there's two slides here with a bunch of capabilities, and I'll pause for a moment. But a lot of the things that you all kind of touched upon, you know, what do we do for infrastructure security? How do we manage users? What are the choices we might make for federation? How do we manage our systems? What does patching look like? Do we use Systems Manager, Patch Manager? Do we use something like WSUS or you know, Red Hat satellite type infrastructure? You can do all of the above. We've tried to make some of these choices deliberately to make it easier to kind of implement these security controls just by default. So nothing would preclude you or prevent you from actually substituting any or all of these, depending on what your needs might be or what you might already have on in your cloud environments or on premises. But we're just trying to kind of map those different requirements to what AWS provides. So just again, sample capabilities here from infrastructure security to vulnerability management, you know, things like ACAS and HBSS, down to patch management.
Do you have actual mapping towards SCCA, SRJs?
There is an FRD mapping. see us after the talk, and we can kind of talk about what we've produced. So again, the last thing here is just these 5 additional capabilities around data protection, endpoint security, AD, Enterprise Directory, how you would manage group policy, how you would do some of the automation and stigging. The stigging is a good question, and how that might look from a whole life cycle perspective. And ultimately, how you can make some of these choices, and you're not necessarily locked into any one of these areas. You can make one choice and roll it back and try something else. The framework's designed to accommodate for that. And especially as we release new services, capabilities, and features, not just in GovCloud, but in the other regions as well, you can kind of flex and swap out components at will, such that this framework grows and evolves with your compliance requirements. This is really all we've got at this point. There's about 5 minutes left. We're going to be available after this session to take any questions or anything you might want to talk about. But we really appreciate all your time. And again, it's really great to see everybody out here in person. It's been kind of a tough couple years here, and it's good that everybody kind of came out. And again, really great to see you in person. And thanks very much for your time here this afternoon. And one last thing, please don't forget to rate the survey. Thanks, everybody.
Well, thank you.